So I have a parable to tell. At least I'm fairly certain that it's a parable, but it may not be a parable. It may be a story, or perhaps you might want to designate it as something else, um, and you can certainly do that. And it begins with someone sitting in a garden, or perhaps it's not a garden. Perhaps it's some other place, and perhaps that person that is narrating the parable or telling the story, if the story is not a parable, is not even sitting. Perhaps that person is wandering or sauntering, as Thoreau designates the difference between sauntering or roaming and journeying to a destination. But for the purposes of this parable or story, we'll just say that its setting is a garden, and this person who's sitting. Let's just say the person is sitting. The person may or may not be sitting. The person may be wondering. The person, as we said, just let's say sitting in this garden is waiting for the rain, and let's just say that this is a parable, and let's title this parable "The Life of the Mind," a parable called "The Life of the Mind." And this person who's sitting in this garden or wandering through some place that might not necessarily be a garden, but is definitely waiting for the rain. Let's make that part determinate and in some sense stable. Whether the rain actually arrives or not, this particular narrating subject is most certainly waiting for the rain, and this subject who may be in a garden, either sitting or wandering around some other place, but definitely is waiting for the rain, begins to think about what it means to wait for the rain. And for whatever reason, he or she or they, or however this subject of the life of the mind contemplates themselves and designates themselves, thinks of Samuel Beckett and the play Waiting for Godot, and the absurdity of these two characters, Vladimir and Estragon, who are waiting for Godot, and this subject, who either is or isn't in a garden, and who either is or isn't sitting or wandering or sauntering, considers the analogous relationship between waiting for rain and waiting for Godot, and somehow that brings this subject of the parable, which is called the life of the mind, or maybe called the life of the mind, or if you decide to call it something else, maybe called something other than the life of the mind. But this story or this parable that I've designated as having the title "Life of the Mind" contemplates this problem of what Vladimir and Estragon are actually waiting for, and and he or they or she, recall all of these various interpretations of this idea of waiting for a God, perhaps, and hence the term, Godot, the name Godot, and what that might represent for Beckett, and this subject in this parable called or perhaps not, called the life of the mind, provisionally perhaps, that we've designated as being titled, the life of the mind, considers what seems to be missing from this long history of not too long, because this history of criticism is less than 100 years, and anything less than 100 years isn't that long, but considers what's missing from this criticism, at least missing from their knowledge and familiarity of the history of the criticism of Samuel Beckett's Waiting for Godot, which is the obvious kind of interpretive solution that one might utilize, to solve this problem of what or who or what kind of symbol this figure that's being waited for Godot represents. And that obvious solution, or at least what seems to be obvious to this particular subject in this particular parable that we've provisionally designated as being titled the life of the mind, is struck by how obvious it is that the transposition of the last two letters in the name Godot transforms this character into an allegorical figure of good, the good. And if in fact Vladimir and Estragon are waiting for the good, it raises this question of the absurdity of waiting for the good as opposed to performing the good, right? Performing the next right action, as opposed to waiting, for someone to perform that action for you, or being allowed to perform the next right or good or correct or ethical action. And then and the subject of this parable, that who is provisionally sitting in a garden, or wandering through it, or perhaps not, as you can decide for yourself, and change the terms, right, of the parable to suit your own purposes. But the subject considers how this idea of the transposition of those last two letters, the D and the O, from Godot into the good, also clarifies in a certain sense the interpretations that have been presented in the course of the history of understanding this particular play, Samuel Beckett's play, as at least this particular provisional subject of this provisional parable understands the history of criticism, and how it's often referred to as a waiting for God, and of course that waiting ties in with Samuel Beckett's experience of World War II, and his active resistance to the forces of destruction and fascism that he participated in, as an ambulance driver, and also as an active member of the resistance in the French Resistance, and how bringing those two ideas together, God and good, in a certain sense. I don't know if this particular subject in this parable that may or may not be called life of the mind, wants to say that solves the absurdity of this problem of waiting versus doing, but it certainly brings some significant light into the way that the absurdity of waiting for this ambivalently or ambiguously constructive good slash God, is designated by Samuel Beckett in the symbolism of this particular play called Waiting for Good, or Waiting for God. And then for whatever reason the subject, he or she or they or however you prefer to designate this subject of this discourse or this parable, if you prefer to stabilize the term under which we've designated this story and this talking, considers how perhaps Beckett began the idea of and this is really speculative on the part of the subject of the parable or provisional parable or story or discourse, or however you prefer to designate it, but speculates or thinks about or contemplates the idea that perhaps this play isn't really that different from the performance art of Diogenes of Sinope, who walked around the city with a lantern in midday looking for a good man, and that looking for and that waiting, in a certain sense, occupies a similar place in the designation of the absurd, and the obvious, in a certain sense, the obvious solution to the problem of waiting, for the good, or searching, for a good man is simply acting as the good and in the service of the good, or acting as a good man, and how in a certain sense the waiting or the searching is the absurdity is that the actions that one performs could be replaced by actions in which one becomes the object that one is waiting or searching for, or the subject that one is waiting or searching for, and then the subject of this particular provisional parable or story or discourse, or however you might prefer to designate it, realizes that perhaps if one imagines the rain as a metaphor, that the waiting for the rain poses the exact same problem that is posed in Samuel Beckett's Waiting for Godot, and the obvious solution to the problem of waiting for the rain is simply to become the rain and to perform the actions that the rain performs. And I've narrated, you know, this parable slightly incorrectly, because I wanted to begin with the reason that that I'm making this video, and the reason is because this the subject of this parable, you know, in addition to waiting for the rain and following, you know, all of these thoughts regarding the relationship of the rain to Vladimir and Estragon's wait for Godot, and Diogenes of Sinope's search for a good man, you know, led this this provisional subject provisionally sitting in a provisional garden, provisionally waiting for the rain. Or I think we've stabilized that part of the parable. So, you know, definitely waiting for the rain. You know, wants to share, like, wants to share these thoughts that occur in the life of the mind, you know, which is not only the title of the parable, but the experience of this subject, you know, considering the form and structure of the parable, and the process of contemplation that the parable bears upon, and this desire to share, you know, causes, you know, an additional term in the waiting, because this subject is now also, in addition to waiting for the rain, you know, waiting for an interlocutor, you know, passing by on the street, with whom, you know, her or him or they or whoever it might be, to share this discourse or parable, or these thoughts that occur, you know, in the life of the mind, which is both the title of the discourse or parable, and the experience of this subject, and this waiting, right? This waiting, you know, somehow the anxiety of waiting for something that doesn't arrive, is replaced, you know, with an action in which the subject of this parable or discourse or rambling set of thoughts goes and retrieves some kind of a recording device, and records the parable, because you know, perhaps she or they or he, you know, grow either tired of waiting or anxious that the waiting, you know, will not result in the arrival of an interlocutor, and perhaps, you know, that the subject of that parable, you know, fears that the meaning of the parable and the understandings and the life of the parable itself will be lost, because the interlocutor, you know, failed to arrive. And the obvious solution is to take or create an action that records and materializes in some shape or form, you know, the thoughts and life of the mind.